Все добре. Слава Ісусу Христу! Дорогі присутні тут в нашому шатрі, дорогі присутні онлайн, будемо зараз розпочинати. І оскільки в нас анонсована лекція наша англійською мовою, я роблю Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V і переключаюся на англійську. Чи шифтом то це робиться. So, glory to Jesus Christ, dear guests, dear speakers here in Cool Campus and those who are online. Today we're going to have a very brilliant, I think, and bright evening. Why? Because today we're going to talk about a very important topic, about the 30 years of Ukraine independence. This is quite important year, yeah, because as a political nation, we think about that we have some time passed. And definitely we have some lessons to learn. So let us today discuss those lessons. And I have a pleasure to announce that we will be doing today our discussion with a very interesting panel. As we'll have one of the prominent historians in Ukraine, in Central Europe, in world, Professor Yaroslav Hrytsak. Let us welcome him. And we're expecting to have a great analysis of these 30 years. But also we have our students, our bright and nice students who will be representing our future and who will be making our future. So let us welcome our bright students. Alexander Silchenko from Ethics, Politics, Economy program. Anna Dobrogorska from History program. And Borzhena Buryo from Sociology program. We'll have our discussion in the next following ways. So first of all, we will have a lecture by Professor Yaroslav Hrytsak. Then we'll have our panelists commenting some general ideas, what they like, what they don't like, what their ideas about the future. And after all, we will have the public discussion with our guests and also with our online guests. So I just want to remind you that we have a YouTube translation. So if you have any question or comments, so please write them on the YouTube, and I will be moderating this session and asking them to our famous panelists. So if you are ready to start, I just want to start with a few intro things. So definitely 30 years of our independence is a huge, in modern terms, political time. I just recommend you to read, if you don't do it right now, very brilliant book about the temporality of the politics. Very famous professor, Swedish professor Eriksson, wrote a book about the tyranny of the moment. And he, in this book, introduced that the time and the political time is actually speeding up. So what was like 100 years ago, like this political time is now could be like 10 years of the political nation. And definitely 30 years since 90s is pretty good time to answer these questions. I just want to start with a few data, what we are today as a nation. So our GDP per capita changed, actually doubled since 90s. In 90 we have 1.5 thousand of US dollars, now we have 3.6 thousand of US dollars. But the case is that, for example, Moldova tripled the GDP per capita. Our life expectancy in births also increased, but not so much. From 70 years in 90s till 71.3 in 2017. Our Human Development Index also increased from 44 points out of 100 in 94 until the 75 out of 100 in 2020. And our Global Competitive Index also increased. In 1995 we have 7 out of 100, and in 2019 we have 58 from 100. So we are pretty not so rich, but still alive, and with good perspectives and trends. So what does it mean in terms of the history? Can we understand that we have some good examples of what we have done greatly, and what we should do in the next 30 years greatly. So without a hesitation, I just want to recommend you Professor Yaroslav Hrytsak with his lecture.
Thank you so much, Pane Dmytro, for your kind introduction. I was very pleased and honored. I have to correct you, though. I am not one of the most prominent. I am the most prominent. And also, I am the most modest person in the world, as Hercule Poirot used to say. I'm supposed to speak in English. This is not the best choice, neither of language nor a speaker. I have problems speaking in any language, including my native Ukrainian, more so in English. You probably know there is a variety of English in the world. There is Jinglish. This is the way they speak English in Jamaica. And you could get the idea when you listen to the songs of Bob Marley. There is a Chinglish, which is Chinese English. So I'm speaking Yunglish, Ukrainian English, or more precisely, Jinglish, Galician English. Or being more local, I'm coming from Morshin, and probably know Morshinska Voda. So in my village, they speak Minglish. So this is the way they speak my language, so please take this into account. I thank you so much. You're very kind. You're very kind. But it's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story. This is kind of promotion, some kind of address to you, students. Don't be afraid to speak broken English. It's a norm. If you're not a native speaker, or if you don't live long enough in Britain or the United States, it's a norm to speak Chinglish, Jinglish, or whatever it is. I would provide you with only one single example. There has been a famous Polish king, Michał Wiśniewski, who was the grandson of Dmytro Vishnevetsky, the famous founder of the Zaporizhzhia Sich. This Michał Wiśniewetsky was known as a person who spoke fluently 8 languages. 8 languages fluently. There is only one great problem with his. He had nothing to say in any of these languages. So I say the main message, the real challenge, whether you have something to tell in this language, if you have some kind of message. And this is exactly the message I want to deliver today. This is very much subjective view, and probably you know this is the kind of quotation that I like very much, and I keep repeating this. This is what Norman Davis, the famous, really famous professor, said that only bad historians pretend that they're objective. The good historians, they're necessarily tendacious and subjective, and the only thing they have to do, they have to beware of this fact and confess it to the audience. So I'm confessing, they'll be very subjective. And let me start with my personal memories, reminiscences. This is me exactly 30 years ago. It's 25 of August, 1991. It's United States, it's a Michigan state, it's a Dibrova, the famous Ukrainian resort place. And I was delivering speech today. At that time my English was probably better because I lived in the United States already for half a year. And I was, delivering on the subject of Ukrainian independence. And my basic message is that this is something greatest event that ever happened. So please welcome new Ukraine and new generation. What this picture doesn't show is that I was deeply frustrated. I was actually depressed because before the independence, before the coup d'etat, I was ready to fight, to struggle for independence, Ukrainian independence for years and years and years, for decades. I imagine myself to be a hero of the Ukrainian national struggle. It quite suddenly just ended, finished it, because they proclaimed independence. I felt, like a kid. They give you a toy that you like very much, and they take it away. So this is my greatest frustration because I believe, stupid I was at that time, that everything is already solved. That once we have independence, the success story would come very early. There's another dimension of the story, because when the independence was announced, those of us who are older than Pan Dmytro, they do remember that this was the time of great anxiety, fear, stress, whatever you name it, the last days of August. On the 19th of August, there was a coup d'etat, and there was attempt to return to the good, bad Soviet times, probably something similar, not quite similar, but some kind similar to the Stalin repressions. And at that time I was in the United States. I left for the United States in the June, I believe. I had to work on the book on Ivan Lysyak-Rudnitsky. And I was that time at Dibrova, and I remember I didn't sleep at night very well, and I was listening to the radio. And during the night, they announced that something has happened in Moscow. And then I asked my friend who were in the car to bring me back to the university, because I was just thinking that once something has happened, I have to be the place where I'm affiliated with, at the University of Michigan. And while we were driving, they were driving me, we keep listening to the radio station. And what was the most terrifying thing, a radio station, they keep informing and commenting on the events in Moscow. And basically the message is, nothing really happened. They get used to it. They get used to Stalin, now get used to the new government. Probably somebody they were repressed, even killed, but it really doesn't matter. They have to continue business as usual. So there's a message. Now imagine me sitting in the car, listening to this kind of story, as United States was ready to betray our cause and treat the relations with the kind of the coup d'etat as a kind of normal business. I left my family at that time. This is my wife, Olenka. She's sitting in the back row. This is at that time, and I had 2 kids. And I had a nostalgia. I was missed enormously, and just imagine the dramatic dimension, the tragedy dimension. I didn't know what to do, because I have either to return immediately back to join them, but then on the risk to be arrested, because you're in the United States, by definition, you're already some kind of the dangerous person, or to stay there, but there is a danger of new Iron Curtain, and I couldn't see them anymore for the rest of my life. So I'm telling her, you probably could not imagine what kind of interesting time we had. Comparing these times, your time is very boring. You don't have kind of excitement, it's kind of adrenaline. But this is not the whole story. I won't be talking about events. Events are very important. My idea is to talking about some broader picture, broader scheme, broader framework in which you could put this event to get the better understanding what is going with us, with Ukraine, and what may happen to Ukraine in the next 30 years or so. And I will be doing this as a historian. And I believe the best achievement or the biggest discovery the destroyers made in the 20th century, they discovered time, which may strange sound to you, because everybody knows time. How could you discover time? It's not exactly astronomical time, the time that we measure by our watches or by phones, by smartphones. What they mean by the time that there is historical time, which is quite different than the time that we measure by our watches. It has its own speed. Some time could go slower, some speed up. It has some cycles, recycles, whatever it is. And this is the man, or the person, probably the best historian of all people of all time. It's Fernand Braudel, who made this kind of discovery. He came with the idea with the longue durée, something which has continuity, so to say. Because basically he believed that what we have on the surface, these events, they have some underlying factors which going deep. And more deeper they are, the slower is the time. And the more it works. Even so we didn't understand this, the factor is stronger. So to put it, give us this example, imagine what could happen if Volodymyr the Great, Veliki, would accept Christianity not from Byzantium, but from Rome. Probably they have a kind of different story. But this is an event that happened exactly 1,000 years ago. And still, it affects us in many ways. So basically, this is what Braudel was trying to say, that some events, some factors have a long-term effect. And it takes a good historian to understand them and to explain them. Since then, actually, it was a very noble attempt to turn history into a science, like chemistry, like astronomy, discover some kind of tendency or laws or kind of things, to look at the past with the telescope, have a broader picture. And I'm sorry to tell this, that this attempt has collapsed. Even so, this very ambitious project, the result was rather modest. So since the last decades of the 20th century, historians stopped to write and think in terms what Braudel suggested, longue durée. They look into the past not with a telescope, with a microscope. They're studying a very tiny things, like one village, one community, or one person, or they don't study some kind of the objective process anymore, they do historical memory. And this is very easy to do. It's a very nice fun because it takes some hours sitting by the computer that you could compose any article about historical memory. And this is, I would say, some kind of defeat of this novel project. Basically, in very broader term, it's called postmodernism, which distracts all this kind of great narrative, because it's basically great narratives not even are possible, they're harmful, because they were always ideologically loaded. So my point is that nowadays, good for us, we now experience something like return of Braudel, return or longue durée. This is the rather famous book, History Manifesto. It has been published 7 years ago by the dean of the historical department at Harvard University, Armitage, which basically says that they have to return to longue durée, that this kind of deconstruction has stopped. We have to start constructing things, to look at the history with telescope again. And the time is very important, because the book was published exactly in the same year as the Euromaidan emerged. Because what happened at Euromaidan, in larger picture, in many senses, it was the end of postmodernity. Not of postmodernity, we are still in postmodernity, but end of the postmodern discourses, which basically says that meta-narrative doesn't matter, that the idea of the truth is an invention of the white European males, all the kind of things, you know. So basically, this is probably one of the best books on the Maidan written by Marcy Shore. You probably know Ukrainian Knights. Taras Dobko is one of the heroes of this book. She quoted him immensely. But basically what he says, her main point is that postmodernism has died on the Maidan because Maidan revealed, showed that some things still matters. Some values still matters. Some narratives matter. So basically, what I'm trying to tell you now is to get back to rehabilitate this long durée dimension to understand better what happened to us. So my first point. Now I'm getting to the point of historical time again. If you look on the astronomical time, we could compare Ukraine with any country which lives in the same time zone, another time zone, but has something in common, not the common, but just live in the same time. Like we could compare Ukraine with Poland. On the Tokyo Olympic Games opening scene, they look very familiar. This is the same time. And actually, we compare Ukraine to Poland, what we had, failure, the basic failure. Because basically in 1990s, Poland was, I would say, even doing wars, much worse than Ukraine in economical terms. And now it has been changed. Now we keep emigrating, now young people not Poles are rushing to Ukraine as it used to be in the 80s. Now Ukraine's large numbers are migrating to Poland. And we may use this perspective, this kind of comparison. And the correct comparison, but not quite. Because if you apply historical time, the picture would be different. Because historically, it makes much more sense to compare nowadays Ukraine, not with nowadays Poland, but with Poland after the first 30 years of Polish independence. Because both Ukraine is a young national state. So you get a better picture, you have to compare it with another national state in the young stage of this development. I will do the exercise, it's relatively easily. If you look what happened to Polish state, to Poland, independent Poland, it has been reborn, let me remind you, in 1918. So 30 years will be 1948, 1949, yeah? So what happened during this time? In the first year of Polish independence, the first Polish president, Gabriel Narutowicz, has been assassinated by a Polish nationalist. The first president, just imagine, of the independent state has been assassinated, not by Ukrainian, by a Polish nationalist. Because they believed that this president, this politician, is supporting national minorities, Jews, Ukrainians, that he's betraying his cause. So he was killed. In 8 years, there were more than 10 prime ministers, 10 governments. Tired of this chaos, Pilsudski, who was architect of Polish independence, he organized coup d'etat in 26, he came to power, and established authoritarian rule, which lasted approximately for the next 10 years until his death. So this is kind of political instability. People are killed, assassinated, government changing in the chaos, you have authoritarian rule, then corruption is getting high. Jerzy Gedrich, probably name which may be familiar to you, he contributed very much, probably the man who contributed the main contribution to the Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation. He wrote his autobiography, and in the 30s, he was a bureaucrat in the Polish Ministry of Agriculture. And basically what he says there, that corruption was so widespread that only idiots didn't take a bribe. He never mentioned himself was an idiot or not, whether he was taking bribe or not. But I say it's kind of general rule. Bribe is a must. Then we have strong regionalism plus separatism. Bandera, which organizes the assassination of the Piratsky Minister of Inner Affairs. And last but not least is the military aggression by both Soviet and Nazi army, and by the 1939 Polish state ceased to exist. Then it's reborn, but already as a communist state. So just drawing on this kind of comparison, what you say here, there is some kind of intrinsic weakness, or if you wish, intrinsic illnesses of the young state, which is political instability, seduction by authoritarianism, strong regionalism with danger threats of the separatism, widespread corruption, war aggression, and then you have to face your own, so to say, sustainability by facing all this kind of the challenges. If you look on this story, you may find that Ukraine has something in common, that many of the things that you have here also occurred in Ukraine during last 30 years. Fortunately, we don't have any president assassinated. Even so, sometimes you want them some to be, just, excuse me if I'm using this, telling this in Catholic University, who shouldn't tell that. Well, I'll stop at that moment. But you have a regionalism, you have a separatism, you have a corruption, you have a revolution, and you have a seduction about authoritarianism, and also you have some dangerous threats from outside military aggression. So the main thing is whether young state could stand these challenges. So on this basis, you could compare nowadays Ukraine. For sure, every comparison fails because you have to include some other factors. Interwar period is not quite like we have nowadays. Even some claims that there's some similarities, more than that we could discuss it. But basically, you could easily claim that this comparison, stinks. There's something wrong with this comparison. But you could get some other comparison if you wish. You could compare nowadays Ukraine to France of 1829, 30 years after proclamation of independence. This is the year before, after the French Revolution, Napoleon War, change of regime, and in a year, France would face one of the revolution. That will be several of them in the next 40 years. 3 revolutions in the 19th century, starting in 1830. Familiar picture. Or look at the Germany. Germany as a nation state emerged in the 1870s, so 30 years on, it will be like a 1919, 1920. What you have there, you have a collapse of regime, you have a revolution, you have a civil war, you have a weakness, corruption, inflation, all kind of things. So what I'm trying to tell, there is some intrinsic failures or weaknesses of every young state. And Ukraine also faces or experiences these weaknesses because of its status of being young national state. The key issue is whether Ukraine will stay in the category of the young states or whether it could be mature, grew up to become, say, a normal state. So this is the biggest challenge which I believe Ukraine faces nowadays. And now, again, from the events, I'm going into a larger picture. And I would say that what is at the stake, all these kind of events, it's one and the same large process, which is called modernity and modernization. Because basically nation and nation states is product of modernization. They're very modern. Every nation is a very modern concept. Excuse me for using this kind of example. I know it sounds not quite correct, and there's some kind of feminist in this auditorium that may hate me, but if I may compare nation to something, I would compare them to young girls. All young girls try to look younger. In contrast to them, all nations try to look very much older. Starting from Tripilia culture, from the Moses time, all the kind of things. So basically, nations pretend to be what they are not. They pretend to be, very old product, ancient product, but they are not. They're very modern. They're very modern. And basically, it's a product of the last 100 years, and I believe all the states you discussed, this kind of examples, falls in this category. We may not, it's very hard to define what is modernity. There are many ways, many criteria, people keep discussing historically what modernity is, but I would basically say that modernity is about subjectivity. If you're modern, your subjectivity is very high. You're visible on my map. You're just more visible. You have a big potential. And the black story of modernization, that this potential, more often than not, is realized or expressed by your military supremacy. Once you modernize, you have a modern army, and basically modernity always starts with the army. And probably know, the most modern technology is always technology connected with the military industry. So basically the story is that if you are modern, you have a high subjectivity. If not, you are in the danger. Or as this cartoon, British cartoon from time of the Victorian time, it just presents British modernity as another kind of train or car, which is harnessed by the British dog, and it says, modernize or die. The choice is very simple. Either you are modernized, have a stable state, stable political life, strong army, good education, and then your subjectivity is very high, or you don't have the things, then you may to perish. One of my beloved examples, unfortunately, is China. You may know that by the end of the 16th century, before the time that the West started to expand to become a global power, if somebody would make a bet what country would be the most modern country in the future, or what country would govern the world, I would say most of the learned people would bet on China at that time. It was the most technically advanced society. You probably know Francis Bacon once said that in the reasons of Europe's supremacy are three things. It's a compass, powder, and printing press. Chinese had all the things much before than Europeans had it. China was a huge empire with a very organized, regular irrigation system, which has practically no famines, where the bureaucrats, there was no elites, aristocracy was no bureaucrats, and your position in the bureaucratic ladder was defined by your exams. Zeno. You have to pass the exam, and depending on your results, you will get your place in this state system. So what I will do, because I just said that we have military supremacy, you have to open. What happened there? Japanese, in response, started what they called Meiji Revolution. Basically, it was not that much revolution, kind of evolution, restoration, but they restored empire, and then they started to emulate West in every single detail. If you ever been to Japan, I've been to Japan, what would surprise you that all the schools, children, I don't know about university, but schools definitely, they wear the same uniform, both boys and girls. And you'll be amazed because basically it's a uniform that was existing in the Prussian schools in the 19th century. They went there, they seen there, and they emulated, and they dressed Japanese like a Prussian schoolboys and schoolgirls, because I believe it's efficient, so to say. So what I'm saying here, they accepted Western ways without losing the Japanese identity. This kind of revolution, major revolution, took 20 years. Again, watch the Last Samurai, tells the story how the samurai class vanished as a result of this revolution. Samurai turned into bureaucrats, into modern bureaucrats. But as a result, 20 years later, Japan had a war with Russia, which was the Western power, and Japan won over the great European superpower, which is kind of another example, opposite direction to China. There's also a case of Russia and the Soviet Union. So basically what I'm saying here, the story is very much similar, that more often than not, modernization starts after defeat. So Russia started the modernization after defeating Crimean War, 20 years of modernization, 60s, 70s, until the assassination of the Emperor Alexander II, 1881. So since then, they stopped with reforms, and as a result, there was defeat from Japan. Then they started it again at the last year after the revolution, the first revolution, under Stolypin. They were rather successful, but they came too late. And as a result, you have a Russian Revolution, Stalin modernization, all the kind of things. Basically, both Russian modernization before the war and Stalin modernization was relatively successful. Very much like in Japan. They turned the previous agrarian traditional society into a modern industrial state. In the 1960s, Soviet Union had the best rates of the growth for GDP per capita. You know what's great domestic product, gross domestic product, which is criteria, economical criteria, 6% and more. There was a Nobel Prize winner in economy, Paul Samuelson, who wrote at that time the textbook in economy, in which he predicted that if Soviet Union will expand and develop by these rates, this tempo, it will catch up with the United States, the earliest by the 1987, latest by 1997. The irony was that by that time, Soviet Union ceased to exist. So I'm saying we have different types of this modernization, success and failures. So the story is basically that you may have a very good results when you start modernization, especially when your country is poor and agrarian and backward. And you know, your development going, it's surprising, amazing character. But it's not the big thing to have this result in short run. The big challenges is to have the stable developments. Not rapid developments, but stable developments. Again, in this direction, this kind of footnote, everybody now looking closely to China. They have a very rapid development, but whether it be a stable development, it remains for you to see in next 20, 30 years. So now I'm come back again. This is about modernity. What is modernity? Basically, modernity, it's about this kind of the scheme. It's a line, sorry. It's whatever you take. This is a number of the scientific discoveries by year. This is the Newton, his famous works, and let's go further on. Or if you look on GDP per capita, or you could use any kind of data, like even break of the pandemic. It's always described by this curve. It looks like, like a plane who takes a long speed up upon the time point where it's take off, and then it changes dramatically this trajectory. And this is modernity. So the main form of modernity is more and more and more, and up and up and up, and faster and faster and faster. You probably know as a student, or you would know, because what defines our everyday life? Deadlines. Because we lives in the time when speed matters, and speed is increasing, and we're trying desperately to catch up with this speed. And always fail, because it's possible to keep up with those kind of deadlines, and therefore we feel constant stress and depression. In the old good times, people didn't have a stress. They have a fear. They could have a feeling of famine, but they don't have stress. Nowadays, stress is a general feeling. Nobody has time. The measure of your success, the more successful you are, the less time you have, or vice versa. Who has more time? Who has time? Those like a homeless, who doesn't fit this kind of the scheme. So what I'm saying here, basically, this is exactly when this national state emerges. They emerge within this trajectory. So the main thing is how to enter this stage. Not just enter the stage, but how to, not just rapid development, but have a stable development. So where do Ukraine stands in this sense? I just use a kind of example. Some of us who have been on Maidan, you may remember, on the entrance of the Maidan, there was this large placard with quotation for Yuri Shevelov. I don't believe that you have to introduce who Shevelov is. You may know, you should know it. If you don't know, pretend you know him. Okay? So basically what Shevelov says, світ прийме нас лише модерними. So we have to be modern, or otherwise we may perish. And I believe this is exactly the main drama, or if you wish, main tragedy for most of national states. Because it's basically whether they could get two things, stability and subjectivity. To be not the object of history, but subject of history. So in this sense, I'm going to the end of this story. What I just said is not original ideas. This is, I'm just trying to retell some other works, books, whatever. I would provide you with a list. But if you was reduce this list just to one position, this one would be the most important. This is the short article written by Alexander Gerschenkron. It's 8 or 10 pages. He was an economist. He was an economist, professor of economy in Harvard University, who was born in Odessa. He was a Russian Jew who managed to escape Russian Bolsheviks. And he moved to Austria, not the best place to choose because 20 years later Hitler comes to power. So he fled to United States, and this is the perfect place to stay, and he became professor at Harvard University. And since he knew very well Russian Empire, Austrian Empire, he tried somehow to generalize the patterns of their developments in the 19th, 20th century. And basically, he developed a theory how to modernize for the countries like interwar Poland or nowadays Ukraine. Let's face it, they are poor countries. They are poor countries, they are economically backward, or should say underdeveloped. And he says basically that what matters here, and therefore I'm him, it's history that matters. Basically, this economical backwardness has been a result of some historical factors. If you want to have this kind of stability, you have to work with history. And basically, if I may somehow reduce this story, what is the problem of the failure of modernization? This is the full premises. There's some kind of general form of modernization that works everywhere. You just copy and paste and copy. Some kind of Washington consensus. You have some list. If you fill this list, it works everywhere. The real problem from a historical point of view is that this is not a global formula. Because modernity per se has historical homeland, but emerges first and then expanded. And this homeland is a Great Britain, British case, 19th century. As Ernst Gellner used to say that every nation, to be modern, has to change its character. The British nation was the only exception that have to stay as they are, without any kind of the changes. The basic thing is, the challenges of modernization may be reduced to a kind of metaphor. It's like you're taking one plant or one species from one ground, which this plant grows in some kind of climate, whatever ground, and try to plant it in other circumstances, conditions, and then try to see whether it will grow or not. So basically, there's a story of modernization in other parts of the world. A part of the Great Britain looks like examples or try some kind of, examples of breeding penguins in Sahara or tending bananas in Siberia, to put in different positions. So what Gerschenkron says, it's tough, but it's doable. Because what you have to breed penguin in Sahara, you have to build them a zoo. Or if you want to have bananas in Siberia, you have to build orangeries. What he basically says that Eastern Europe, this kind of our region, which has Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, even some part of Germany, since they have quite different historical conditions, you could just proceed with kind of modernization. You have to take extra measures. It doesn't mean to say that you're doomed, that you will fail definitely. No, it says you have to try more, you have to try better, you have to do some conditional measures. And basically, this is not the most original part of his story. The most original part of his conclusions, or kind of his suggestions, he had advices, what you have to do. So there were several of his advice points. First of all, he says that there's kind of illusion among this kind of European nation that they have to start slowly but surely to encompass, to measure, to whatever, to adapt some kind of achievements, reforms will take a year or 2 or 10 years or 20 years, and then it will result in a kind of success story. Some kind of the strategy slowly but surely, like a snail. You have a stability, and once you have the stability, kind of economic reforms, slow reforms. Then, as a final result, you have a kind of success story. he basically says, it doesn't work. For this kind of the countries, Snell strategy doesn't work. For them, only strategy that really works is a leapfrog. You know what's a leapfrog? Strzybok, żaby. You have to make a very short and brief and radical changes in a very short period of time. And then you may have a chance to have a takeoff. You could have a takeoff slowly but surely. This is one of the premises of the theory. Second theory's point is that in the Great Britain and some of the Western countries, the modernization was made by the entrepreneurs, by craftsmen, by merchants. Actually, you probably know that the only country that has no modernization was Britain, because they don't need it. Modernization was other countries. But basically the story is the modernization grows from below. Gershon's point is that Eastern Europe, it's a different story. In Eastern Europe, where all these kind of institutions are weak or non-existent, the crucial role is played by the state. And the more to the east, the more important is the role of the state. State is a crucial actor. And this is very important to say, because we have this kind of impression, we say illusion, if you will, that in Ukraine they have a beautiful civil society. And once we have a civil society, we could expect changes. No. Civil society is necessary but not sufficient. What you have to have a power. You have to have a, because the main levers of the changes is within the state. So what is our problem? That this beautiful civil society could not organize its own descent into the corridor of the power to make this kind of the frog leap. The third element or conclusion, which is kind of the result of both two, the crucial condition is the emergence of elite, of new type elite, who has a political power to make radical changes in a very short period of time. Like Balcerowicz in Poland, or Georgia, under you know whom, all these kind of things, yeah? So this must be very rapid forms, but some has to have elites. And basically, these elites didn't come just for pleasure. They emerge in the critical time. You have to have a crisis. The more crisis you have, the deeper crisis you have, the better are chances for emerging this kind of elite, which could change the country. And the last point is that you could not have just economical reforms without political reforms. Once you have economical reforms only without political reforms, you are bound to fail. It's exactly the case of Russia. Because all the authoritarian reformation, modernization, could bring you rapid results. But in the long term, they fail. So basically, I would say this is ABC for every reformer who tries to change the country, Ukraine included. So then I come to conclusion. What are possible scenarios for the next 30 years? I would go from the less possible scenario to more possible scenario and to the most needed scenario, or the most needed and desirable scenario. The less unlikely, the most unlikely scenario is that Ukraine would perish, cease to exist. This will keep this kind of the story, especially from Kremlin, that Ukraine is state for an hour, state number 404, non-existent, that will bound to perish, all the kind of things. This is kind of the anxiety and fear is also shared by some Ukrainian patriots. They say that Ukraine would disappear. If nothing would happen, Ukraine would disappear from in year or two, whatever it is. This kind of alarmist scenario, it's just, I would say, forget it. Because what you have there, you have a rather stable society. Ukraine state is relatively stable, and it survived very severe crises. The 93-94 crisis, two Maidans, the Russian aggressions. So it's stable. And the most guarantee, the main guarantee of the stability is the interest of the ruling elites. They don't want to trade their sovereignty with any kind of things. I used to say about Yanukovych, I say it in Russian, forgive my Russian, что за независимость Украины Yanukovych кому хочет пасть порвет. You get this message, yeah? So they're interested in that. So I'm saying here, there are chances that Ukraine they disappear, but this will result probably some kind of global disaster, some kind of the new pandemic, meteorite, astronomical kind of collapse, whatever, but not something that would come from within. I'm not saying it's not possible scenario. It's a possible scenario, but less possible scenario. We have to be aware of the scenario, but we shouldn't take it as a kind of something that would make our decision. The most possible scenario, and this scenario is exactly what we have now, this kind of snail strategy, slowly but surely. Ukraine is going step by step, growing in the forced stability. Dmytro provided with these numbers, which are good but not quite amazing. They are rather poor, so to say. But basically, you could live with this in this kind of the strategy or trajectory for a very long time. But then you will never grow up. Your illnesses of your young age became chronic. And one of my favorite example comparison is Argentina, which has quite similar starting position like United States, but never took off and never became a major state. And still this kind of peripheral state very much like Ukraine, so you want to have comparison Ukraine, nowadays Ukraine probably the best looks into Argentina. And the third scenario, which is less possible but most needed and most desired, is a takeoff. And I don't see, personally, as a historian, any kind of objections or handicaps which would not allow Ukraine to make this takeoff. More than say, I would say that Ukraine for 30 years has done a lot. The Ukrainian airplane make a very long, so to say, distance, and it's ready to take off already. Plane is there. There are maintenance is there. The only thing that's missing is a pilot. Those elites who could get into the cabin and to change the trajectory of this country. So to conclude, every generation has its modernization. Modernization is like a cowboy work. If you know what cowboy work is, it's never done. You could never finish it. So you couldn't stop this modernization. But the key element is the pilot. So what I'm saying here, what I see here is large numbers of the future Ukrainian pilot. And how is the feminine of the pilot? Pilotis? Пілотки, як це сказати? Політики, прошу? Пілотеси. So, this is exactly what I try to say here, this final point. I believe that one of the main gain, advantage, whatever you say, Ukraine independence is emergence of new generation. It's not just I want to make compliment to you. It's objective. And you look on the sociological data which describes you, your level of mobility, your education, your values, you are very different from us. For good or worse, I believe for good, you are very much different from us. We have some kind of generation gap, which, by the way, didn't happen in Russia. Because in Russia, the older generation reproduced the younger generation. If you compare Ukrainian generation, Russian generation is conservative. Put it very briefly, if they have a choice, they will still vote for Putin. And don't make any changes. Which is not the case of Ukrainian youth. They keep choosing every new president with every new election, so to say. So what I'm saying here, that Ukraine had a certain window of opportunity for takeoff. The first Maidan, the second, and basically. But it failed. It just squandered these possibilities. And this is a sad story. The good story is, you probably heard this already from me, that even so, the window opportunity in Ukraine is closed so far, we may have it or not, we have a corridor of opportunity open. This corridor of opportunity is related to you, your personal biography. Because in the next 20, 30 years, you will be, believe me or not, will be much older. you'll be 40, 50, 60s. And the laws, as I say, political biology, you would take responsibility for this country, whether you like it or not. So what I'm saying here, what would happen with you personally, would also happen with our country. So this is what I'm saying here. Use your chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Yaroslav, for this brilliant lecture. And you see, all this Russian spies or cyber attack was on our YouTube channel, but everything is okay. I'm looking here, we have this video, and everything is great. So now we have the possibility to discuss a little bit, and before we start talking with the with our guests here, we have 3 bright students, and Professor Hrytsak was talking about like the generational changes, and I would like to ask Anna, so as a historian, as a young historian, can you confirm that we see those changes?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very honored to be here today. And yeah, I would like to reflect on the lecture and to talk a bit about the last point that Mr. Yaroslav spoke on. And I would like to talk about the political elite. And but I will tell and talk and speak more from the cultural perspective. And yeah, I would like to say that we are like going through the period when the new cultural elite is forming in Ukraine. And like one of the scenarios that Mr. Yaroslav said that was more like less unlikely is that Ukraine is a part of Russia, or is dependent on Russia, or is like not a state or something like that. And yeah, but after Euromaidan, this scenario is not possible. And Euromaidan is also a very like big milestone for for creating a cultural elite in Ukraine, because Euromaidan pushed us to search for our identity and to look and put the question like who we are. And very slowly and very gradually, like the new music started to produce, the new films started to be produced, like the new fashion brands are being created now, like the new gastronomy culture is being created now. And we can also see like that entrepreneurs are becoming more and more oriented also on the Ukrainian market. And it's very cool, and like to be Ukrainian it's become a trend now. And the peculiarities of this period that we are going through at the moment for me is that we are rethinking our identity and our culture. And I can tell also that we can identify our cultural elite, like and distinguish ourselves from the cultural elite of the commemorate of the independence country, or S&M. And now we can see like the more and more artists are creating the new product, that the artists that sang or wrote in Russian start to do it in Ukraine. Yeah, and I can compare this period with the Ukrainian national revival in 19th and 20th century, and there were 3 periods. We can identify 3 periods. The first one was when we were searching for the folklore, like some traditional songs, some traditional clothes. It was in 19th century. The second stage of this period was the cultural, when the cultural elite also was distinguished, and they created a lot of like communities. They created a lot of like arts, like works. And yeah, and then this cultural elite become a political elite, and they created the political parties. And what I can tell that in 1990s, when the Ukraine became independent, we also were going through this period of searching for our traditions, for our songs, and for our clothes. And I can even tell it from my personal experience because I play the bandura and I play in the bandura ensemble. And this ensemble was created at the end of 1990s, and we played very traditional songs, like this ensemble. I wasn't there in 1990s, but they played very traditional songs. The clothes was very traditional, etc. But it was like this till the I think the 2020s, yes, and then we changed our songs and started to rethink and playing different interpretations of Ukrainian songs. We changed our costumes to more modern, but Ukrainian also, and I think this is like the period of rethinking and created this new culture, Ukrainian culture, and new culture, and searching for this new cultural elite. But what about political elite? We can observe that at the moment also this cultural activists become a political activists. But I think that it is the mistake of this Ukrainian revival in 20th century. I think that we have a chance to move more quickly if the young, educated people will create this political elite, and I think that we should change this and work on this. And I also speak a lot about the similarities between this Ukrainian national revival in 19th century and between the period that we're going through now, but there are also some differences, and I think not the only, but the main difference is that we are having, the Ukraine is an independent state for 30 years, and we didn't have this at that time in 20th century. And I think that we have the new generation of people that lived in the independent country, and that we have this chance to create this political new elite. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So the main idea that the new generation will do a fashion, a trend of Ukraine, so let's hope it will be. And I just want to refer to Alexander. So Professor Hrytsak was talking about these three possible scenarios. So what is your vision as a political scientist about that?
Well, do you hear me, yeah? So first, I would like to be short because I see that some people are a little bit tired right now. Second thing, I would like to get used to my voice because it's too loud right now. Well, talking about all those scenarios, of course, we just heard that two of them are not the best for us. And, when I try to analyze the third scenario of how we need to change everyone, like adults, young people, next generations, how we need to work, I just tried, to compare ourselves to countries like Poland, to countries like Lithuania, to understand how we can take their examples and how we can take their experience in a way to develop. And I found out maybe one important thing this thing is understanding the fact that it's impossible to find and use easy solutions for big and complex problems. I mean, unfortunately, right now in Ukraine, we just see that there is maybe not the best situation because, I don't know, for example, there are still people who believe, who trust, and who vote for someone who says that to stop a war, you just need to stop shooting, or people who believe that everything will be all right when someone says that he will take everything under his personal control. And I believe that when people just start to analyze this idea, when people will start to use this idea, they will be able to unite, they will be able to understand the scope of the way to develop, they will understand how much resources do they need to develop, and finally they will understand how much time do they need to spend to develop. And of course, they will understand the fact that sometimes you just need to make unpopular decisions to get benefits not in short-term conditions, but in long-term conditions. Because when you try to build a nation, when you try to build a country, you just need to work on long-term. It's impossible to get everything you want in short-term. So that's why I believe maybe it is a case of how people from Poland, how people from Lithuania, they understood that and they tried to implement that idea. And I believe when every single one of us will do that, they will be able not to blame someone for some problems which appear in our country. They will not try to find a way, to wait for someone who will do everything instead of them. And they will start from themselves. And after they start from themselves, they will find people who will share their ideas and who will do this with them together.
Great, thank you. So the ability of change is also present here. And actually, this comes to the point that I want to ask Božena as a sociologist. Can you tell us that we are different people here, so we have something different in our minds, and we have the ability to do a change?
Hi, yeah, I'm actually want to say that I'm really honored to be here as well and to reflect on such a great lecture. And speaking about change, I actually, the lecture of Pan Yaroslav was bringing me to the point where I was thinking about to say that we need to know our past to build our future. It's like just this general thought, and we need to learn from mistakes. But actually now I really got the understanding that we need to learn from our past and change and make progress, but we need also to understand the present. Pan Yaroslav was talking about this big picture of our history and of the events in this big picture, and he was also talking about this interesting comparison. And this comparison is a little bit different that we always usually basically do it. It's this real comparison of what we are now and why we are now here. And being able to understand this presence will actually can lead to this misunderstanding of our future. And the next thing I would like to say that progress is the change, and we are on this way right now. And Pan Yaroslav was also speaking about this revolution of dignity, which was supposed to be this big jump, but it unfortunately failed. However, I really see how we are now getting this understanding of presence, of who we are. It's like concluding what my colleagues also said, that we are now getting on this ground, and it wasn't that big jump, but it learned us to distinguish black and white, to distinguish good and bad, and that is the way we are moving forward. And I think, yeah, that's all.
Okay. Thank you so much. So before we start the questions, I just want to refer a word to Pan Yaroslav. So you heard these reflections, just optimistic, bright, sweet, ready to take historical lessons and to go forward. Are you happy with them? So are you optimistic for the next 30 years?
I have to say first that I'm extremely pleased to learn that English language of these young people is much better than mine. They don't speak Jinglish. They speak real English, which gives another hope. This young generation is better than us. My very short comment on what you just said was amazing. What you just said, that in order to take off, we don't need to put all the Ukrainian population in the cabin of the plane. You see what I mean here? They will be rather passenger. What we really need pilots. Believe me, there will be always a large segment of population that don't want to fly. They don't want to change. So the crucial issue is not just have everybody on the plane, more so in the cabin. The real challenge is to have a pilot with political will. And this is exactly what I'm saying. My lead for my conclusion is, you don't have to be, how to say, you have to expect the old generation would look like you. Generation is a formless. It's a rather biological entity. It has no taste, if I may say so. Who gives the taste? Who is the salt of generation? small groups which were motivated, educated, and organized. And the best place to have these young elites is to have universities like Kyiv-Mohyla, Ukrainian Catholic University, and Ukrainian academic leadership. This is what I'm saying here. Just beware to what extent you are important. Your potential are salt of generation. You have to provide the taste. Once you do it, every passenger would enjoy this beautiful, how should I say, plate.
Great, thank you. Build not political will, but political coalitions, as Frank Fukuyama told. Okay, questions. I see a hand here. I just need to go there? Oh, no, there is a beautiful help here.
Hi, I have a question. What profits does Ukraine have becoming independent in 21st century, but not like France, Poland, and Germany like the previous centuries? And does Ukraine have those profits?
What do you mean by profits of myself? Just could you elaborate this point?
So like it's easier to move faster and like to become less corrupted and all the other things. Like there were many revolutionaries and civil wars previous centuries, but now it seems to be easier. Is it easier? And if yes, in what ways?
Is it easier right now? Dear panelists, you all four.
No, it's not fair. It's not fair. Lady first. No. It's easy in a way that in the 20th century, Ukraine was in geopolitical isolation. Until 1991, Ukraine practically have no allies, say, in the larger world. With one exception, probably. In 1991, it was Poland. I mean, Poland, after Solidarność came to power. They really were, very voting, very supporting, but apart of that, United States forget about, if you remember, you don't remember, I forgot you were born much later than I was talking about. But 1991, George Bush came to Kyiv 2 weeks before the coup d'etat to tell Ukrainians that they should not separate, they should not live in the Soviet Union. Could you imagine this? Chicken speech. Or Margaret Thatcher came to Ukrainian parliament just to deliver a message that she would not talk with Ukraine because Ukraine is like a Texas state in the United States, has no sovereignty. So this is God's idea. Nowadays you could compare. So what I'm basically says, this is not my point. My point made by some political analyst, that there is a long list of the discrepancies and problems between Washington and Brussels. They disagree on many issues and subjects. But basically, they agree on one thing. Russia has to be stopped. Ukraine independence should be preserved. So I believe it's a very immense advantage, asset, or profit, if you will, which create additional chances, which I believe we should not squander.
Thanks. Comments? Good. Then, any other question? If not here, I have one from the YouTube. Actually, Lubo Solontai is asking that, to her mind, sometimes we feel that we are in the historical cycle, doing the same one time by time. So the question is, are we in this historical cycle and how we can get out of that?
No? Okay, I will say, and you will disagree with me, okay? You will comment on me. Basically, historians basically do not believe in the cycles. Cycles basically not possible. You probably know there is a famous Italian novel, Leopard, the Geopard. The hero says that basically, to getting back, it takes too much efforts. that you could allow. It's impossible. So the 4 cycles doesn't really work. What I really meant to say, whether we should stay in this condition as we are, which is relatively stable and relatively poor. And this, I believe, condition could long, if not forever, but for very long. But again, the basic problem is, or solution is, do we really like it, this situation? Do we feel comfortable with this? Because I believe, again, that one of the main preconditions of the changes is the feeling of sorrow, shame, deep shame, the shame that should burn you inside. The kind of discrepancy between the potential of your country, your richness of natural human resources, between who you are and who you could be, really could be. This is very important thing, crisis and shame. Now this is, once you have this, because then you try to move out of the comfort zone. The real story is, the truth is, that we may wish to live in another country, but we feel very comfortable where we are right now. We may complain, all the kind of things, eating ice cream and drinking coffee. As nothing really matters. And this is dramatically wrong. Because once you stay in the comfort, the country would remain as it is.
Gathering more questions.
Yeah, I have one question.
Oh, please.
Here.
Hello, everyone. Can I ask you a question on Ukrainian language, because it's very hard.
I do understand Ukrainian.
Thank you very much. Ви в своїй промові ви згадували про так звану сталінську індустріалізацію і про те, що за часів Сталіна в ці періоди 30-ті, 40-ті, 50-ті роки під час модернізації Радянський Союз почав дуже швидко рости. Але цей ріст, ця індустріалізація була результатом величезного геноциду українців. І чи взагалі коректно порівнювати планову економіку Радянського Союзу з ринковою термінологією, тобто валовий внутрішній продукт і так далі? Тобто, що ви можете на це сказати?
Thank you so much. Correctly or not correctly, it's not me to ask. You have to have economists. They do that all the time. They have this kind of criteria, GDP per capita, rate, they measure it. So this is the thing. But I believe what they're saying is, because it's a kind of rather moral question, but it's more like moral question because it affects the life of many people, millions of the people, so to say. So what I'm saying here, this is something we can cover. Modernization has always a dark side. And dark side is a violence. More violence or less violence. Violence over the people you send to Gulag, or violence for the people who don't want to get into the plane. But it's a smaller violence, the thing is. So the issue is, one of the secrets of the successful long-term modernization, the less violence, the more successful. You see it here. Because basically the story is that every authoritarian modernization fails. Look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a perfect modernized country in 1960s, but modernized by the authoritarian rule. See them in here. There's only one exception, there's 5 exceptions, but this exception relates to the so-called Asian tigers, but they say basically it can be explained by the factor X, and factor X is religion, Confucianism, yeah? Which creates quite different set of values, and it enables the authoritarian modernization, like Singapore, like Lee Kuan Yew. But as again, Ukrainians are not the Confucian country. Neither is Poland, let me say. So basically, you probably have to go this larger scheme, or say kind of the highway, which has been already trodden by any other country, not authoritarian. Because again, that's probably the next step. Look what happened to Russia. At the time you were born, Medvedev was in power. And Medvedev came with a strategy of modernization of Russia. There's a strategical plan, 2020. They has ambitions to create their own Silicon Valley. More than that, you could not remember, but I remember well when the Russians, Putin was claiming that they would invent Russian iPhone. And there was a picture like them, Putin and Medvedev proudly look in this Russian iPhone. Have you seen the Russian iPhone? You see them here. It's a failure. Basically, story of the Russia is a constant failure. Russia is a Ukraine is a failure too in terms of modernization, but Russia is much more bigger failure, what I mean to say here. Because Russia keeps on the authoritarian model. And difference between Ukraine and Russia, that in Ukraine authoritarian regime doesn't work, attempt doesn't work. So therefore I believe we should be much more optimistic about Ukraine than about Russia.
Okay, thank you. So I see one hand, so please, and this will be the final question, so please.
The last question, yes. I have a question for Mr. Yaroslav, because I was in the previous lecture of his, it was in Collegium, and so you said that we have to save the world, like young people who are studying in Ukrainian Catholic University have to save the world.
Somebody else is speaking.
Yeah. It is in the church. So,
In the church?
I don't know, do you hear me? But
I do.
I have one question. When people don't feel that they should be saved, should we save them if they don't want so? And what did you mean that we should save the world? Because many people don't want from us to save them. And I don't understand the sense of this. So, thank you.
So you're referring to my previous lecture?
Yes, previous lecture that was yesterday, maybe.
It was a long time ago. I don't remember it. It's just like I'm an older man. You have to keep repeating me.
About the history of Christianity.
Thank you so much. The world is in the danger. It's a mortal danger. And every day time is ticking off. And you probably know this kind of famous story about Orloch. Orloch talks, it's Zifferblatt. Orloch. When this was created, I believe, in the 50s, 60s, when the leading scientists measure the closeness of apocalypse, end of the world. And several years ago, it was 5 minutes to apocalypse. Now it's 3 minutes to apocalypse. See what I mean here? Because the level, modernity means many things. But again, modernity has a dark side. And the dark side is ecology, global warming, again, losing of the solidarity among the people. Because more of a secular became, the more individual we are, the more egoistic we become. So basically, what I'm saying, and also that I've probably heard is that next 20 years may be crucial in terms of the natural resources. Whether the nature, Earth, could keep with this kind of exponential development. So what I'm saying here, this is what many kind of, it's not to say the diagnosis, that the next 20, 30 years could be crucial, not just for the future of the world, but for existence of the world per se. See what I mean here? Just give one example probably. Imagine that one of the most desirable things in the future would be water. And probably the fertile ground, for the biological fertile ground. And Ukraine has these resources, huge resources, which means a danger here, that this nothing would be changed, and Ukraine would have a lot of subjectivity. The future wars that could emerge, Ukraine will be in the center, like in the 40s. If you read the Timothy Snyder book, Black Earth, which is basically about Ukraine and the Holocaust, he basically says it's a future. It's not just a past. It's a very possible future. So what I'm saying here. So there has something to be done with that. And one of the reasons is, in order to resolve these issues, you have to have a certain level of subjectivity. Because if you not be a part of the team that resolves these problems, they will resolve without you, and quite often maybe on your own cost. And you're a victim. See what I mean here? So this is what I'm saying here, which basically is good. Because crisis is getting deeper and deeper. As I say, deeper and deeper this crisis, the more is the feeling, awareness of this crisis, the more are the changes that people, we will be changing, really changing, not just saying, not just in words, but in deeds.
Yeah. So unfortunately, you feel it's pretty cold and dark here in Lviv, but I don't want to finish with very pessimistic way, so I just want to finish with very optimistic way. And we're talking a lot about the changes and the future, optimistic future for Ukraine is 30 years, but definitely we need to do the first step. So I just want to ask every panelist, what we should do at the first step in the next year? One thing, only one thing. What should we do? What should we train?
Train? Exactly what you... Oh, okay.
Whatever you wish. What should we do? What should we train? One
Marry.
thing.
What?
Marry. Those at the age of 22 and older have to marry as soon as possible.
Great.
I'm joking. No, I'm serious.
I think it's education.
Education. Educate ourselves. Good.
Maybe I will repeat, but I would like to say that start changes from yourself. I mean, it could be anything like marriage, education, I don't know, physical conditions, anything. But you just need to start from yourself, and everything will get well.
I was going to actually say the same as Alexander, but I would say self-discipline, which also connects with what Alexander just said, but you not only start with yourself, like in words, but you actually start. And that's what is self-discipline and how we need to train it.
Well, now I'll be serious. If I may suggest you something, advise you something, do create a discussion club here in Catholic University, just to start discussing these issues, because it always matters. The good ideas comes in the company, especially these ideas are discussion are accompanied by the good coffee. I have plenty this stuff in both cafeteria.
Okay, whenever you are thinking to do the next year, to marry, to have a discussion club, to train yourself, or to do a good education, I think there is a lot to do. So let's keep this next year, at least academic year, active. And thank you all for staying here, and thank you, wonderful panelists, for the brilliant discussion club here alive. Thank you.
Dziękuję.